Fishing Line is an isometric perspective puzzle game where the player takes on the role of a fisherman fishing on an icy sea, but for each fish caught, the length of the fishing line is increased by 1, and the player has to deal with different terrains. So the player has to plan his fishing route and rod order in each level to catch all the fish. About game mechanics, I provided tips in text on the ground. You can press key WASD to move on the ice grid by grid, but you need to turn around first, and you can press key space to fish. I also provided the tips about core mechanic, plus 1 fishing line length for each fish caught. There are 2 special types of terrains, fragile ice and slippery ice. Fragile ice will sink when the player moves away from it. If the player moves onto or turns onto slippery ice and the direction of the player's face is parallel to it, the player will slide to the end of the ice and cannot stop in between. I designed 3 levels first to guide the player in order to get them used to the mechanics of moving from grid to grid and fishing. Then, a new terrain, fragile ice, is introduced in level 2 to 1. And I add more fragile ice and fishing spots on level 2 to 2 to increase the challenge. After the player has passed the last challenging level, the player will come to a new, slightly easier level, 3 to 1, which allows the player to relax for a short time and introduces the new terrain, slippery ice. This adds to the strategy of player movement. Level 3 to 2 is a more complex level with the slippery ice, allowing the player to get used to the movement mechanics of slippery ice. However, the level is not too difficult and the player even has several solutions. In level 4 to 1 and 4 to 2, I've added fragile ice and slippery ice as the last 2 levels of the game demo, and their difficulty is moderate so that players won't feel too much pressure. In terms of art, all my 2D art is done in the pixel art software Asaprite, and my main character image follows the main character from the first game I made, a block of Tetris, and turns her from a 2D sprite into an isometric viewpoint pseudo 3D sprite. Other art materials are the rods, and some animation, the fish, in-scene text, UI. The main character looks like a piece of paper in the Unity scene, but with the correct camera placement she looks fully integrated into the 3D space. The same pseudo 3D trick was used for the text in the scene. Sprite letters with pre-drawn shadow relationships were stacked on top of each other to make them look thick when viewed from the camera. In terms of code, the 4 most important scripts are those that control character movement and fishing, as well as 2 special terrains. Take a throwing rod script for example. The script sets the fishing animation's trigger and use ray detection to determine if there is a collider with bubbles near the end point of the ray. If there is, catch a fish and then make the ray distance +1. I'm very glad to develop this game. It's my new attempt in developing puzzle games. In the future, I will develop more mechanics and levels to give players an even better experience.